My name is Penelope Hartman. I am 43 years old, and I work as a property manager on Florida's Gulf Coast. Years of experience have trained me to spot small signs of trouble before they grow into disasters. A loose railing, a door that doesn't close flush, a shift in the tone of a voice. These things speak volumes if you know how to listen. That afternoon in Clearwater Beach, every instinct in me knew something was off. The wind carried a sharper edge than usual, even though the sun was bright. My parents had asked me to meet them at the beach villa I had cared for over the past 12 years. The villa was my sanctuary, my pride, the one constant in a life where so much had changed. When I arrived, they were already there. My father stood on the bottom step of the porch, gripping a thick envelope so tightly the corners bent. My mother's gaze was fixed somewhere just above my head, her lips pressed into a straight line. Behind them stood my sister, Margaret, and her husband, Ethan. Margaret's smile was the kind that looked polite to strangers, but smug to anyone who knew her. Ethan's expensive sunglasses reflected the sunlight, turning his eyes into mirrored shields. My mother spoke first, her voice even but cold. "Penelope, this villa now belongs to Margaret's family. It's theirs now. You are not allowed to come here." For a moment, even the sound of the waves seemed to fade into the background. Her words landed with a weight that made my chest tighten. Years of memories, storm repairs, summer barbecues, quiet winter mornings, flashed through my mind. I could have shouted. I could have demanded an explanation. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was deliberate, controlled. My eyes shifted toward the horizon, watching the waves curl and break in their steady rhythm. My right hand slipped into my pocket, fingers curling around the villa's key. The sharp edges dug into my skin, grounding me. Margaret shifted her stance, clearly waiting for me to argue. Ethan tilted his head, almost amused, as though this was a move he had predicted. My father's jaw worked as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Inside, my thoughts were moving fast. They believed they had cornered me. They thought this was the end of my story. What they didn't know was that I had never played by their rules. I stepped aside slowly, my silence making them uneasy. The villa loomed behind me, white siding gleaming under the afternoon sun, shutters freshly painted after last hurricane season. Every inch of that home held a story, and every story had my fingerprints on it. "I understand," I said finally, looking my mother in the eyes. My voice was calm but carried a firmness that made her blink. "If that's what you've decided." I turned and walked down the sandy path toward my car. My steps were steady, my shoulders squared. At the driver's seat, I paused to look back. Margaret was already gesturing toward the windows, talking about curtain colors. Ethan pointed at the deck railing, no doubt discussing changes. My parents stood in silence, the ocean wind pulling at their clothes. They thought I had accepted defeat, but they had no idea I was already setting my first move in motion. When they came to move in, I would be ready, and the surprise I had for them would not be one they could forget or undo. The first time I saw the villa, I was 9 years old. We drove up a narrow coastal road lined with palms, the sun dipping low and turning the horizon into a ribbon of gold and violet. The villa was small then, weather-beaten, with chipped paint and shutters hanging loose. But in my eyes, it was a palace. That first summer, we painted the fence together. My father whistled softly as he worked, his hands sure even when the wind carried the smell of salt and fresh paint through the air. My mother set out glasses of iced sweet tea on the porch railing, droplets sliding down the sides. Margaret, already a teenager, pretended she didn't care about the project, but she still laughed when I smeared white paint across her arm. The villa became the heart of our family. We grilled fresh fish on the back deck, lit sparklers on the 4th of July, and huddled together inside during storms, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. When my parents began spending more time inland, someone had to look after the property. Margaret was long gone, building her life elsewhere. I stayed. I stayed through hurricanes that ripped the roof open, through summer heat that warped the porch boards, through endless repairs and insurance disputes. I paid the property taxes year after year, kept the insurance current, arranged for contractors to replace the roof, repaint the siding, and rewire the electrical system. Every dollar came from me. Every improvement passed through my hands. The villa was more than wood and paint. It was the hiss of waves through open windows, the glow of a late sunset over the water, the cool grit of sand between my toes after an evening walk. It was my place to breathe, to think, to heal. That was why the words on the porch cut so deep. They weren't just telling me I couldn't enter a building. They were erasing my role in its survival. And that was something I would not allow. 2 days after the confrontation, I received an email from my mother by mistake. The subject line read, "Temporary Management Agreement." I opened it and began to read. The document granted Margaret management rights over the villa. The language was vague, with no fixed end date. Buried in the clauses was a phrase that made my pulse quicken. Extended stewardship, to be continued under certain conditions, conditions so loosely defined they could be stretched to mean almost anything. Ethan's influence was all over it. He had a talent for dressing self-interest as generosity. Once, he'd told me that the real power in contracts lay in what wasn't written down. That night, I called my mother. When she answered, her voice was tight. I asked why she had signed the document. She hesitated before saying, "It's for the best, Penelope. Margaret's family needs a stable place. You have your own home." Her tone was measured, but I could hear the crack in it. She didn't answer when I asked who drafted the agreement. She claimed she didn't remember the specifics, which I knew wasn't true. After we hung up, I printed every page and spread them across my kitchen table. The lamplight pooled over the words, casting shadows between the lines. My mind ran through the possibilities, recalling every detail I knew about Florida property law. By midnight, my plan was forming. This would not be solved with emotional arguments or family meetings. It would be solved with records, evidence, and the quiet certainty of legal proof. I began gathering my arsenal: tax receipts for every year, invoices for roof repairs, bank statements showing insurance payments. I pulled up photos of me repainting the shutters, emails from contractors confirming work orders. Every piece of paper was a brick in the wall I was building. They thought they had outmaneuvered me. They didn't realize that by trying to push me out, they had only given me the time and reason to prepare my move. And when it came, it would be one they could not reverse. 3 days after I studied the so-called temporary management agreement, my phone lit up with Margaret's name. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear her voice, wanted to know exactly how she would play this. I answered with a steady, "Hello." She didn't waste time on greetings. "We're moving into the villa next week," she said, her tone crisp and unapologetic. "You don't need to be there. In fact, I'd appreciate it if you stayed away." The audacity of her words pressed against my chest like a weight. I kept my voice even. I wasn't aware the transfer was final. "Oh, Penelope," she sighed, the way someone might talk to a child who didn't understand the rules. "You're being selfish. You have your own house. We need the villa more than you do. You can't hold on to everything just because you're too attached to let go. This is family. We're supposed to help each other." I could hear the false sweetness coating her voice. Gaslighting. That familiar twisting tactic where you're painted as the unreasonable one for simply wanting what's yours. I'd heard it before, years ago, when she borrowed my car for a few months and returned it with 20,000 extra miles. "This isn't about helping each other," I replied. "This is about taking something that doesn't belong to you." Margaret laughed lightly, the sound brittle. "You've had it for years. You've enjoyed it. Now it's our turn. Mom and Dad agree. They're even coming for the move-in next Saturday. We'll make a little celebration out of it." A celebration. My parents attending, smiling as they watched me erased from my own property. The image seared into my mind. Margaret unpacking her things in my kitchen, Ethan boasting about his new investment, my mother serving lemonade on the porch I had rebuilt with my own hands. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a fight. "Noted," I said simply, and ended the call before she could say more. The room felt smaller after I hung up. My heart was beating faster, but not from panic. It was the same steady, controlled rhythm I got before making a critical move in a chess match. I pulled out my notebook, the one I use for client property disputes, and wrote down the date of the move-in. Then I underlined it twice. If they wanted to make a show of transferring the villa, then I would make a show of something else, something far less predictable. The key in my pocket felt heavier than usual. I ran my fingers over its grooves. remembering the hundreds of times it had slid into the front door lock. That door had never once been opened without my consent. I began to think in layers. The obvious step was to consult my attorney, a man named Victor Harlan, who specialized in property rights and had a fondness for dismantling sloppy contracts. But beyond that, I needed more, proof so airtight that not even Ethan's smug legal maneuvers could pierce it. The celebration Margaret envisioned would become my stage. My parents, my sister, her husband, they would all be in one place, believing they were about to watch me vanish quietly. They would not expect me to arrive with something that would halt their plans in midair. I closed the notebook, feeling the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just set the first domino in place. They thought they had declared checkmate. They didn't realize I still had pieces on the board they hadn't seen. And next Saturday, they would. After hanging up with Margaret, I sat in my living room with the phone still in my hand. The temptation to call her back and unload every thought racing through my head was strong. I could have shouted about the years I had carried the burden of that villa, the storms I had weathered alone, the thousands of dollars I had poured into keeping it standing, but shouting would only feed their narrative. That I was emotional, unreasonable, unable to see what was best for the family. I knew better. They had already closed ranks. My parents had decided to back Margaret, and Ethan had already manipulated the legal paperwork in their favor. If I attacked them head-on now, it would be my word against theirs, and they had the advantage of numbers and, for the moment, perception. So I sat very still, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, letting my anger settle into something sharper. Anger is loud. Strategy is silent. I needed silence now. I pulled a legal pad from my desk drawer and drew 2 columns, one for expenses and one for proof. In the expenses column, I began listing every major cost I had shouldered for the villa. Property taxes paid annually since 2011, homeowners insurance premiums, hurricane repair costs, new plumbing in 2015, the full roof replacement in 2017, the upgraded electrical system in 2019. Next to each entry in the proof column, I wrote where I could find the supporting documents, receipts, bank statements, email confirmations from contractors, photographs of work in progress. My handwriting was steady, methodical. Every line I wrote was another brick in the wall I was building between myself and their version of the truth. I could almost hear Margaret's voice calling me obsessive if she saw this list. Good. Let her think that. Let her think I was wasting my time while she picked out furniture. She would never suspect that each piece of paper I collected was another nail in the coffin of her victory. I flipped to a clean page and wrote at the top, legal leverage. Under it, I listed potential angles, constructive trust claims, reimbursement rights, proof of sole investment, and evidence of my exclusive maintenance of the property. I didn't need to understand every legal term yet. I just needed to know what to research and what to hand to Victor, my attorney, when the time came. Looking at the growing pages, I felt the first stirrings of control return. I had been blindsided on the porch that day, caught between disbelief and fury. But now, sitting here, pen in hand, I was back in my territory. This was my language: records, timelines, patterns. I told myself quietly, almost as if I were speaking to the villa itself. If I want to keep this, I have to play their game, and I have to play it better. The ceiling fan kept turning overhead, its steady rhythm matching the one in my chest. The decision was made. No shouting, no begging, no desperate phone calls. Only patience, proof, and a plan sharp enough to cut through whatever they thought they'd secured. The next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to keep my focus sharp. My legal pad from the night before lay open on the table, pages filled with expenses, proof, and possible angles. It was time to bring someone into the loop, someone who knew how to take these scattered pieces and turn them into a weapon. I picked up my phone and called Selena Ward. She wasn't just any attorney. She specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for being relentless in court without ever raising her voice. We had met years ago through a mutual client, and though we hadn't spoken in months, I trusted her instincts. She answered on the third ring. Penelope, it's been a while. Selena, I need to talk to you about a property situation. Urgent. Her tone shifted instantly. Go ahead. I explained the confrontation at the villa, the vague temporary management agreement, and the way Margaret and Ethan had maneuvered my parents into handing over control. Selena listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a pause before she spoke. Florida recognizes something called constructive ownership, she said. If you've maintained exclusive possession, paid all expenses, and improved the property for years without reimbursement, you may have a claim, possibly even stronger than you think. My pulse quickened. What do you need from me? Everything, she replied. Tax receipts, invoices, bank statements, before and after photos of repairs, anything that shows you've been the sole financial and physical steward of that villa. I'll need to see the exact wording of the management agreement, too. I'll get it to you today, I promised. After hanging up, I felt the first real spark of hope. Still, I knew hope alone wouldn't be enough. I needed something to make sure that when the inevitable confrontation came, I could produce proof on the spot. Proof so undeniable that even Ethan's polished confidence would falter. That's when I thought of David Cho. He was an old friend from my college days, now a cybersecurity engineer who had helped clients secure their homes against everything from break-ins to data theft. I called him. David, I need your expertise, discreetly. You always call me when the stakes are high, he said with a grin in his voice. What's going on? I outlined the situation, careful with the details, but clear about my goal. I want a smart home system installed at the villa, cameras, sensors, full data storage, everything legally compliant but impossible to dispute. He chuckled. You want eyes everywhere without making it look like you're watching. Exactly, I said. Not a threat, just undeniable truth. David agreed to meet me the following afternoon to plan the installation. As I ended the call, I realized my team was forming. Selena with her quiet legal precision, David with his technological edge. Margaret and Ethan might have numbers on their side, but I was building something far more dangerous to their plans. A foundation of facts, fortified by the people who knew exactly how to use them. Selena called me back 2 days after I sent her the stack of documents. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice before she even spoke. Penelope, I've reviewed everything you sent. The receipts, the tax records, the maintenance logs. They paint a very clear picture. And I've gone over that temporary management agreement line by line. It's sloppier than I expected. I leaned back in my chair, pen in hand. Meaning? Meaning you have grounds to secure your interest without alerting them. In Florida, with your level of documented investment and history of exclusive maintenance, you can create a property trust. If you're strategic, you can place the villa into the trust, name yourself as the trustee, and lock the terms so that no sale or transfer can occur without your express consent. A slow smile formed on my lips. And they wouldn't know? They wouldn't see it coming, Selena said. It's public record, yes, but they'd have to know where to look and what to look for. And something tells me they won't be combing through county filings anytime soon. That night, I sat at my dining table with the documents spread out in neat rows. The name came to me quickly, Hartman Coastal Trust. Simple, formal, and unassuming. I drafted the trust agreement with Selena's guidance, naming myself as sole trustee and primary beneficiary. The language was airtight. The trustee, me, had full control over access, maintenance, and use of the villa. No occupancy, transfer, or encumbrance could occur without my written authorization. The brilliance of it was in its invisibility. To Margaret and Ethan, nothing would appear to have changed. The villa would still be where it was, still standing with its white siding and blue shutters. My parents would still believe they'd handed over control, but the moment they tried to formalize ownership, or God forbid, sell it, the trust terms would rise up like an iron gate. As I signed the final draft, Selena's voice from our earlier call echoed in my mind. The law is like the tide, Penelope. You can't stop it, but you can shape the shore it touches. The microspike came when she explained one final clause. Under this trust, you have unrestricted access as trustee. That means you can enter, inspect, and make changes at any time. But they, whether it's your sister, her husband, or even your parents, cannot make any permanent alterations or transfers without your signature. If they try, it's void. Legally, you've built a wall they can't climb. I imagined the scene. Margaret and Ethan hosting their move-in celebration. My parents smiling as boxes were unloaded. They'd have no idea the sand beneath their feet had already shifted. That night, I filed the Hartman Coastal Trust through the county clerk's online system. It was just another line in the sea of bureaucratic records, invisible to anyone not searching for it. But to me, it was the strongest anchor I had ever set. I closed my laptop, the confirmation email still glowing on the screen. For the first time since the confrontation on the porch, I felt the kind of calm that comes when you've moved a piece into position and no one else at the table knows the trap you've laid. They thought the villa was theirs now. They had no idea it was already mine, locked, sealed, and guarded by the quiet weight of the law. David pulled up to the villa in his silver pickup, the back loaded with black cases of equipment. The morning was humid, the air heavy with the smell of salt water. He stepped out, sunglasses on, giving me that half smile he always had before a big project. "All right," he said, popping open the first case. "Here's what we're working with. 4 high-resolution exterior cameras, 2 for the front, 2 for the back. Wide-angle lenses, night vision, motion detection. They feed into a secure cloud server I manage personally." He laid the sleek black devices out on the porch rail, then pulled out a set of smaller, discrete units. These are the interior sensors, door contacts, window sensors, and pressure pads for high-traffic areas, completely wireless, running on encrypted signals. No one's disabling these without me knowing. I followed him inside as he began mapping out the villa's floor plan. He sketched quickly in a small notebook, marking each sensor and camera placement like a general planning a battle. "We'll put the primary hub in the upstairs study. Hidden wiring, backup battery. If power goes out, you'll still have eyes and control." The plan was surgical. Cameras angled not just for security, but to capture key points. Entryways, hallways, the kitchen. Any dispute about what happened inside these walls would be met with clear, time-stamped footage. While David measured distances for cable runs, I stood in the living room, my gaze drifting upward to the ceiling I'd replaced after Hurricane Michael. I could still feel the sting in my shoulders from holding the beams in place while the contractor nailed them down. I'd paid for that repair in full, skipping a vacation that year to make sure the villa stayed whole. The memory burned in me. My voice came out low, almost to myself. "I didn't keep this place standing just to be told I can't set foot in it." David glanced over but didn't say anything. He knew me well enough to let the words hang. We moved upstairs, where he pointed to the corners near the windows. 2 cameras here will cover both the staircase and the landing. Anyone coming or going will be caught from multiple angles. The audio system is optional, but I suggest installing at least 1 two-way speaker. If you need to address someone directly, you can do it remotely, and it's recorded. I agreed. We walked the perimeter outside, the boards creaking beneath our feet on the deck. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond, its rhythmic crash against the shore both calming and relentless. David tapped the siding near the back door. "Here's where I'll run the concealed conduit. Nobody will see it unless they're actively looking, and even then, they won't know what it's for." By mid-afternoon, the gear was staged in each room, ready for installation. David explained how the motion sensors would log every activation, how the system would send alerts directly to my phone and his. "And here's the best part," he said, holding up a small black fob. "This is your master key. It overrides every setting. Without it, nobody can alter the system, not even me without your permission." That was the layer I wanted most. Not intimidation, not surveillance as a threat, just undeniable truth, sealed in digital records that no lawyer's argument could erase. As we wrapped for the day, I stood in the center of the living room, the late sun slanting through the windows. In a week, Margaret and Ethan would walk into this villa thinking they owned it. What they wouldn't know was that every step, every word, every action would be preserved. Quietly, legally, and without room for denial. The ocean kept rolling in, steady and certain, and I felt my resolve match its rhythm. By the following morning, David had returned with 2 more cases of equipment, smaller, heavier. When he placed them on the kitchen island, the sound was a solid thud. "This," he said, unzipping the first case, "is your cloud server gateway. It encrypts and transmits all data from the villa to a secure server I manage in a private facility. No commercial hosting, no third-party access. Even if someone knew the server existed, they couldn't touch it without breaking several federal laws. He moved to the second case and revealed a sleek black external hard drive, sealed in a shockproof, waterproof casing. And this, he continued, is your offline archive. It mirrors the cloud in real time, but stays disconnected from the internet. You'll keep it in a safe, preferably one that's bolted to the foundation. If the cloud is compromised, the offline copy survives. I nodded slowly, tracing my fingers over the cool metal of the casing. So even if someone tries to erase what's recorded here, David finished for me, it won't matter. You'll still have it. 2 separate copies, 2 separate systems. Both yours, both untouchable, without your say. We spent hours configuring the storage settings. Every camera, every sensor, every motion trigger would feed into both systems, complete with date and timestamps, all in high definition. The redundancy wasn't overkill, it was insurance. The kind you pray you never need, but if you do, it changes everything. Once the technical work was done, David walked me through a live test. He handed me a small remote with a single red button. Press this and walk through the front door like you don't belong here. I raised an eyebrow but played along. Stepping outside, I closed the door behind me, then waited a few seconds before re-entering. As soon as my foot hit the entryway, a subtle chime sounded, followed by a calm, clear voice from the speaker system. Unauthorized individual detected. Please leave the premises immediately. The tone wasn't aggressive, just firm, undeniable. I couldn't help it. A smile spread across my face. It was exactly the balance I wanted. Not a threat, but a statement of fact. Whoever heard it would know 2 things. They were being watched, and they didn't belong. David grinned. Works like a charm. And that alert is now logged on both the cloud and the offline drive, complete with video of you walking in. I imagined Margaret stepping through that same doorway in a week, her arms full of boxes, her smile wide. She'd hear that same voice, calm, unshakable, and maybe, for the first time, she'd feel the ground shift beneath her. David packed up his tools, leaving me with a secure system, a pair of master keys, and the knowledge that every move from now on would be captured and stored, where no one could touch it. Standing in the quiet villa, I felt the weight of the law and technology on my side. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was building an unbreakable record. The kind of record that didn't shout, but when the time came, would speak louder than any argument they could make. I chose a cafe 2 blocks from the villa, a small place with worn tile floors and a clear sightline to the street toward the water. My laptop sat open on a corner table, the security dashboard filling the screen with a 4-camera grid. At 9:58, the driveway camera caught a familiar SUV easing into view. Margaret rode in the passenger seat, sunglasses high, her smile tight. Ethan drove with his shoulders forward as if proximity could confer ownership. My parents sat in the back. My mother balanced a cake box on her lap, ribbon taped to the lid, and my father's jaw was set in that firm way that meant the decision had been made before the conversation started. They spilled onto the crushed shell path. Margaret pointed at the porch. Ethan gestured toward the deck. My mother fished napkins and plastic forks from a grocery bag. My father palmed the spare key. Camera 2 picked them up at the door. Ethan slid the key into the lock, glanced sideways at Margaret, and pushed it open. The entry light rose to a soft white. The first alert stamped the upper right of my dashboard. A second later, the hallway speaker delivered the even voice I had chosen. Unauthorized individual detected. Please leave the premises immediately. Margaret laughed, bright and brittle. Pen must have left some demo running, she said, marching inside with the assurance of someone who has never been told no. My mother's shoulders drew upward. The living room feed showed them fanning out. Ethan noticed the stairwell lens and gave it a half wave. Then his phone buzzed. The system had sent the first email. Notice of unauthorized entry recorded at 10:01 a.m. A matching chime came from Margaret's purse, then from my mother's tote, then from my father's weathered phone. 4 screens lit in sequence like buoys on dark water. I toggled to David's map overlay. Motion icons pulsed through the kitchen and down the hall. Each activation created a time-stamped entry mirrored to the cloud and the offline drive. If needed, I could call Selena with a minute-by-minute account. Margaret strode to the windows and threw the curtains wide, as if sunlight could dissolve the message. Ethan flipped a door latch open and shut, watching the red indicator blink each time. My mother set the cake on the counter and rested both palms on the lid as though willing the moment to sweeten. My father read the email twice, slid the phone back into his pocket, and looked at the ceiling. A second announcement sounded, same measured cadence. Unauthorized individual detected. Video and audio recording in progress. Please vacate. I took a slow drink of coffee. I had not built this to embarrass them. I had built it to be undeniable. No raised voices, no scene, only facts. A delivery truck rolled past the curb on camera 1. For a heartbeat, Margaret looked uneasy, as if the world might be watching after all. Ethan pulled on a grin that never touched his eyes. My mother squared the napkins into a neat stack. My father stood still in the center of the room. A third chime rang from their phones. The follow-up had gone out. Occupancy denied under trustee authority. Contact the administrator for access. The administrator was me. I wrapped my hands around the cup and watched the shore on the lower feed take another slow breath. The tide was steady. The law, once set in motion, could be just as patient and just as unstoppable. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "It's probably just a glitch," he said, waving one hand toward the ceiling speaker as though dismissing a fly. His voice carried that forced casualness people use when they're trying to convince themselves more than anyone else. New systems do this all the time. From my view on the laptop, I could see the way his jaw tightened right after the words left his mouth. He didn't believe it, not for a second. My father turned slowly in place, scanning each corner of the living room, like the walls themselves might answer for the interruption. His shoulders weren't as squared as when they'd arrived. They were slightly hunched now, his neck stiff. He glanced toward the hallway camera, then quickly away, as though acknowledging it might make the whole thing more real. My mother kept her focus firmly on the cake box she had set on the counter. She adjusted the ribbon, smoothed the lid, and straightened the napkin pile again, small, repetitive movements to occupy her hands. She didn't look at anyone, didn't respond to the voice from the speakers, didn't even acknowledge the phones that had just buzzed for the third time. Her posture screamed one thing: pretend nothing is wrong. Margaret stood near the sliding glass doors to the deck, her back half turned to the room. She had her phone in her hand, scrolling fast, probably looking for some message or notice to explain what had just happened. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "If it's a glitch, why would it send us all emails, with timestamps?" Ethan's smile tightened. Could be an old configuration. Probably Pen forgot to disable something. My father finally spoke, his tone low. "Feels a little deliberate." His eyes flicked to my mother, but she didn't return the look. From my table in the cafe, I clicked a small icon on the security dashboard. The live feed split into individual frames, each one zoomed in on a different face. Every blink, every twitch of a jaw, every flicker of uncertainty was captured in high definition, stored in the cloud, copied to the offline drive. This wasn't just surveillance, it was a record of human tells. My father's subtle shift from confidence to unease, my mother's willful avoidance, Margaret's frown at something she couldn't control, Ethan's quick, controlled breathing. Margaret finally turned around, crossing her arms. "She's doing this on purpose." My mother let out a breath through her nose, sharp but not quite a sigh. "Let's not start assuming things." My father's gaze lingered on the hallway camera again. "Doesn't feel like an accident." Ethan shook his head and forced a chuckle, but it didn't land. He was already tapping at his phone, likely searching for a way to override the system. I knew he wouldn't find one. I leaned back in my chair, letting the cafe's background noise fade. Every moment here was another brick in the wall I was building, an undeniable chain of evidence. Later, when the time came to draw the line in court, these seconds would matter. They thought they were splitting into sides in a small family disagreement. What they didn't see was that the sides had already been drawn, and the law was standing on mine. The email system worked exactly as David had designed it. Less than a minute after the third unauthorized entry alert, a secondary message was sent to all 4 of their phones. The subject line was blunt: "Occupancy denied, Hartman Coastal Trust." Underneath, in simple legal language, it stated that the property was under trustee authority, access was restricted, and any continued presence would be logged as trespassing under Florida statute. The trustee's name, mine, was printed in bold at the bottom. I watched through the feed as Margaret's phone buzzed again in her hand. She read the subject, then the first line, her lips parting slightly before pressing together in a thin line. She swiped up, then down, as if rereading might make the words change. It took her 30 seconds to hit call. My phone lit up on the cafe table. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Pen," she said, skipping any greeting, her tone sharp. "What the hell are you doing?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the clink of the cup against the saucer carry down the line. "Margaret, do you want to see the contract?" There was a pause. "What contract?" "The one that explains exactly why you're getting those alerts," I said evenly. "It's all very clear in writing." She exhaled hard into the receiver. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, my voice steady. "And I have. Do you want me to send you the contract? Or are you fine staying in the dark?" Another pause. This time I heard background noise, the muffled sound of my mother's voice, Ethan asking something, the faint scrape of my father's shoes on the floor. Margaret's tone shifted, aiming for a mix of outrage and disbelief. "You're making a scene over nothing. This is family, Penelope. You're acting like we're strangers." I glanced at the live feed, watching her words form in perfect sync with her image on the screen. "Strangers don't usually move into each other's homes without permission," I said. She started to respond, but I cut in. "Read the contract, Margaret. Until then, every second you're in there is documented." Before she could launch into another attempt at control, I pressed the red button on my phone and ended the call. I didn't block her. I didn't explain further. I simply left her with the unanswered questions, the legal language in her inbox, and the knowledge that I wouldn't be baited into a shouting match. Back on the feed, she lowered her phone slowly, her jaw tight. Ethan said something to her, too low for the microphones to catch. My mother hovered near the cake box again, her hands busy for the sake of looking composed. My father stayed still, his weight shifting slightly from one foot to the other. The silence between them on screen was more revealing than anything they could have said aloud. They were used to me defending myself verbally, trying to reason. This time, I had chosen a different weapon. Controlled quiet backed by undeniable evidence. And from the way Margaret glanced at her phone again, I knew the seed of doubt had taken root. Selena never wasted time. By the next morning, my inbox contained a neatly compiled digital folder labeled HCT, Trustee Authority Package. Inside were scanned copies of every document that mattered. The Hartman Coastal Trust Agreement, notarized signatures, and 12 years' worth of receipts, tax records, and maintenance invoices. All with my name as the payer. At her suggestion, I forwarded the entire package to my parents and copied Margaret and Ethan. No commentary, no explanation. Just the subject line, "Please review before further action." The response was faster than I expected. Through the villa's feed, I watched as my father sat at the kitchen table, the printed contract in his hands. His glasses slid lower on his nose as he read each clause. My mother hovered nearby, wringing a dish towel between her fingers. Margaret leaned over his shoulder, her expression tight. Ethan stood back, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the legal language. Clause 7 spelled it out in plain terms. All rights to occupy, lease, or otherwise control the property are retained exclusively by the trustee until written consent is granted. The trustee may revoke access at any time, without prior notice, and without compensation to the settlers or beneficiaries. The notary's stamp was there. Their signatures were there. The date was there. I could almost feel the moment my father reached it. His brow furrowed, his lips pressed together, and he stopped reading for a long beat. My mother moved closer, peering down at the page as though proximity might alter the words. Then came the supplemental file Selena had included. A year-by-year ledger of every expense I had covered. Roof replacement after the hurricane. Property taxes when my parents' savings fell short. New seawall reinforcement when the storm surge threatened erosion. Insurance premiums. Pest control. Even the new kitchen appliances Margaret had once praised in a holiday email. Next to each line was a payment record. My account number. My name. Margaret's voice carried across the microphone. "This can't be binding, can it?" Ethan said nothing. My father exhaled slowly, setting the papers down. "It's binding," he said finally, his tone flat. My mother's eyes moved from him to the page again. Her lips trembled. We didn't read it all," she said quietly, almost to herself. "No," my father replied. "We didn't." She sank into the chair opposite him, still clutching the dish towel. Then, without looking at anyone, she covered her face with both hands. The sound that escaped her was not loud, but it was sharp, breaking the air in the room. Margaret turned away, staring out the window toward the ocean. Ethan shifted his weight but didn't move closer. My father sat motionless, his fingers resting on the edge of the contract, as if it might slide away from him. From my laptop in the cafe, I clicked the record button. Every reaction, every pause, every unguarded expression was saved. Because moments like these were worth more than arguments. They were proof. And now, the balance had begun to shift. My phone rang just after lunch. Margaret's name lit up the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. Her voice was tight from the moment I answered. "If you go through with this, I will make sure my son never sees your face again. Do you understand me, Penelope? He won't even know who you are." For a second, I didn't reply. The weight of her words settled between us, heavy and cold. This wasn't about property anymore. This was the oldest card in the family deck. Emotional leverage. I pictured my nephew's smile, the way he used to run to me on the beach, the afternoons we spent building sandcastles until the tide erased them. And now, my own sister was trying to erase me in the same way. "Margaret," I said finally, my voice steady, "you can do what you want. But one day when he's old enough to ask questions, he will get answers. From me, if I'm still here. From the truth, if I'm not." "That's not a threat," she pressed, her tone sharpening. "It's a promise," I said. Silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end, short and quick. Then she shifted tactics. "You're making this harder. Then it has to be. We could work something out, sell it, split the money. It's just a house." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the sting of those words. "It's not just a house. It's 12 years of my life, Margaret. My money, my work, my protection after storms. My nights spent worrying about repairs while you were safe in your own bed. You call it just a house because you never built it into what it is." She scoffed softly. "Always the martyr." I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. Number just someone who knows the value of what she's fought for. On the feed from the villa, I could see her pacing as she spoke into her phone, the conversation playing out in parallel on my laptop screen. My mother lingered in the background, pretending not to listen, but every so often her eyes flicked toward Margaret with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm serious, Pen. If you want to be cut out of this family, you're on the right path," Margaret said. I let the words hang there, refusing to rush. "Families cut themselves apart," I said quietly. "All I'm doing is drawing the line where it should have been years ago." She didn't answer right away. Then the line went dead. I set my phone down and stared at the ocean outside the cafe window. Her threat had been sharp, but instead of shaking me, it carved something deeper. Resolve. They could twist the story for a while, but the truth had its own tide, and it was already rolling in. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning. The subject line read, "Inquiry regarding Hartman coastal property dispute." It was from a reporter with the Palm Coast Real Estate Gazette, a small but well-read local publication that specialized in high-value coastal properties and ownership stories. She introduced herself politely, mentioned she'd been tipped off about a family legal dispute over a beachfront villa, and asked if I'd be willing to give a statement. She wanted details, ownership history, current occupancy issues, anything I could share on the record. I read the email twice before closing it without replying. My coffee sat untouched. The less I said publicly, the better. Silence could be louder than any quote. That afternoon, I noticed a change on the villa's live feed. Ethan was pacing on the deck, his phone pressed tight to his ear, his voice carried through one of the outdoor microphones. "No, I don't know how they found out. But if this hits print, the buyers will back off." Buyers. So that was the plan. They hadn't just wanted to take the villa for themselves. They'd been planning to flip it for a profit. Suddenly, their rush to move in made sense. They wanted to make it look like a smooth transfer, so they could sell fast, before I could intervene. Margaret appeared in the doorway behind him, her arms folded. "Was that about the paper?" she asked. Ethan turned toward her, lowering his voice. "If this gets out, it's going to tank everything. No one's going to pay top dollar for a house with legal baggage." Margaret glanced over the deck railing at the ocean, her jaw tightening. "Then make sure it doesn't get out." I leaned back in my chair at the cafe, my laptop open to the scene. It wasn't hard to guess their next move. They'd try to spin the story before I could. But I didn't need to race them. All I needed was for the truth to be documented. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Selena. Saw the Gazette email. "Don't respond. Let them come to their own conclusions. It'll only make Ethan sweat." She was right. I could already see the tension in his body language. He stopped pacing only to glance toward the road, as if expecting a reporter to show up with a camera. His hand went to his hair again and again, pulling it back in quick, frustrated motions. I didn't need to speak to the press. The villa itself was already telling the story. Every sensor log, every access alert, every recorded conversation a silent witness. And now, Ethan knew there was an audience beyond the four of us. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the scene on my screen play out. He wasn't afraid of me anymore. He was afraid of the echo. And echoes, I'd learned, were impossible to control once they started. It was David who called me first. "They're at the villa," he said, his tone brisk. "And they brought a locksmith." I was in the middle of sorting receipts when I pulled the feed up on my laptop. The front porch view loaded first, Margaret and Ethan standing side by side, their expressions tight, speaking quickly to a man in a gray uniform with a heavy tool bag. The locksmith knelt at the door, inspecting the lock. I could see him frown, then lean closer as Ethan pointed and gestured impatiently. Margaret stood with her arms crossed, her eyes darting toward the camera above the doorway without realizing I was watching. David's voice came through my earpiece. "You'll want to hear this part." The porch microphone picked up Ethan's voice. "Just swap it out. We'll cover whatever it costs." The locksmith hesitated. "This isn't a standard lock. It's integrated with a proprietary smart home security system. If I touch this without the system owner's consent, I could lose my license. You'll need the original installer or the registered property manager." "That's us," Ethan snapped. The locksmith shook his head. "Not according to the system log. The name tied to this account is—" He paused, glancing at his tablet. "Penelope Hartman." Margaret's lips thinned into a sharp line. "She's being ridiculous. We're family. This is a family home." The locksmith straightened up, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Family or not, I can't override the system without authorization. It's locked at both hardware and software levels. And there's a cloud-based backup, so even if I broke the physical lock, you'd still be locked out of the network." I caught David's chuckle in my ear. "Told you the dual-layer encryption would pay off." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low but tense. "You're walking away from good money," the locksmith shrugged, picking up his bag. "I'm walking away from losing my license." I watched as he descended the steps and headed toward his van. Margaret called after him, but he didn't turn back. Ethan muttered something I couldn't quite catch, his jaw tight enough to strain the muscles in his neck. David switched the feed to the interior cameras. Still dark and silent inside. Every door locked. Every system functioning exactly as it should. "They'll probably try again," he said. "But the more they fail, the more desperate they'll get. And that's when they'll make mistakes." I sat back, my fingers lightly drumming the table. On screen, Margaret and Ethan stood on the porch for a long minute, saying nothing. Then Ethan pulled out his phone, pacing toward the edge of the deck as Margaret stared out at the ocean. They had come expecting to change locks and claim control. Instead, they had been reminded, publicly and with an outside witness, that their access meant nothing without me. I didn't have to confront them in person. The villa itself had spoken for me, and it hadn't raised its voice once. David texted me 20 minutes after the locksmith left, telling me to keep an eye on the kitchen feed. Margaret had called our parents back to the villa. She wanted an audience. I opened the grid and maximized camera 3. My mother stood by the sink, fingers worrying a dish towel. My father sat at the table with his shoulders tight. The ocean light poured through the window and made the room look gentler than it felt. Margaret walked in first, chin high, phone in hand, voice already pointed. She said it in plain English, every syllable sharp. You two are too easy to manipulate. You let people lead you by the nose, then you act surprised when it hurts. Ethan hovered in the doorway, saying nothing, eyes on the floor like he expected flying glass. My mother blinked as if words could sting. She tried a neutral tone. We thought we were helping everyone, Margaret snapped back. No, you were helping yourselves feel generous. You signed things you did not read. Now we are the ones paying for it. She gestured toward the deck, toward the cameras, toward the little red status light she finally noticed. The microphone picked up the catch in her breath. She did not lower her voice. My father lifted a hand, tentative. Margaret, do not speak to your mother that way. She laughed without humor. This is what happens every time. You cave, then Penelope swoops in with her receipts and her rules, and somehow I am the villain. He flinched at my name, and my mother set the towel down with care, as if friction alone could start a fire. I kept recording, every frame stamped with time. I was not gloating, I was witnessing. The villa had become a mirror, and nothing in the reflection could be argued away later. My mother whispered that she was sorry. She said she should have asked more questions before signing. Margaret rolled her eyes. You never ask questions when a smile feels easier. You trained Penelope to be the responsible one, and trained me to clean up with charm. Now charm does not open doors, and responsibility owns the locks. The room went very quiet. My father stood. He looked older in that light. He said he had failed to protect both of us in different ways. Margaret's mouth trembled, then hardened. Do not rewrite this into a lesson, Dad. I need a solution, not your guilt. The silence that followed was the kind that changes families. My mother reached toward Margaret. She pulled back. Ethan finally spoke, barely audible. We should go. People can see us from the street. My parents turned toward each other, and I watched the realization settle like fog. They had defended Margaret for years, assuming her polish-covered substance. Now they heard the contempt beneath the polish. It shocked them because it had always been there, only softer. I set my coffee down and saved the clip to a separate folder labeled Unfiltered. The controversy would not be mine to start. It would be theirs to explain. I closed the laptop and let the cafe noise return. Spoons against ceramic, low talk, the hiss of milk. Evidence had done what arguments never could. It revealed character without insult today. Selena called early the next morning, her voice calm but edged with purpose. Penelope, I want you at the notary's office on Thursday. We'll finalize the filings and have the trust amendment certified. Once this is done, their options narrow to almost nothing. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words settle. Finalize. Certified. Narrow to nothing. They weren't just legal terms. They were the steel gates closing behind me, keeping the villa where it belonged. I'll be there, I said. Before hanging up, Selena added, bring every updated document, maintenance receipts, tax records, insurance renewals. I want the notary to see a complete and unbroken chain of stewardship. That way, if anyone questions the legitimacy, the evidence speaks before you do. I knew she was right. My role now wasn't to explain or defend. It was to present facts so airtight they could only cut in one direction. After the call, I opened my secure folder, scrolling through the most recent uploads. My finger hovered over the latest file from the villa's kitchen camera. The one labeled with yesterday's date and the word unfiltered. I replayed the scene, Margaret's voice sharp as glass, accusing our parents of being gullible, my father shrinking in his chair, my mother clutching the dish towel like a lifeline. It was raw and ugly, the kind of truth families try to bury under decades of polite silence. But in a courtroom or a negotiation, it was more than an argument. It was proof of intent, proof of character. I selected the file and sent it to David with a short message. Archive this in the secure drive, primary evidence folder. Keep the redundancy active. Within minutes, his reply came back. Done. Triple encrypted, dual location backup. If they tried to erase this from the planet, it would still exist in at least 4 places. I smiled. Not from malice, but from relief. Every step we took now was deliberate. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building, not to trap them, but to protect what was mine from every possible angle. I thought about the notary's office. Sterile white walls, the heavy wooden desk, the slow scratch of pen on paper as signatures were witnessed. That was where this long fight would quietly tip in my favor. Not in a shouting match, not in a screaming phone call, but in a clean legal stroke that none of them would see coming until it was done. For months, they had assumed my silence was surrender. What they didn't understand was that silence in the right hands is just strategy in disguise. I closed my laptop, slid the folder of hard copies into my leather bag, and checked the appointment reminder one last time. Thursday at 10, the day the villa's future stopped being a question and became a fact. And thanks to Margaret's own words, captured in crisp audio and high-definition video, the truth had a witness that would never forget. The air in the notary's office was unnervingly still, as though even the vents had decided to stay quiet. I sat at one end of the long mahogany table, Selena to my right, her folder of documents neatly aligned with military precision. Across from us, my parents, Margaret and Ethan, occupied their seats with varying degrees of discomfort. My father kept glancing at the ornate clock on the wall. My mother's eyes darted between me and the door. Margaret crossed her legs with a practiced flick, while Ethan stared at his phone, his thumbs scrolling as if the right headline could save him. The notary, a man in his 60s with a voice like sandpaper on oak, cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" he asked. Selena didn't waste a second. "We're here to certify the Hartman Coastal Trust and confirm ownership details for the villa located on Seaglass Avenue." She slid the first document across the table with deliberate care. As per the recorded amendments, the property in question is under the irrevocable protection of the trust. My client, Ms. Penelope Hartman, retains lifetime control and sole authority over occupancy, leasing, or sale. The words landed like stones, dropped into deep water. My mother blinked slowly, as if processing them in increments. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes moving to mine but holding there for only a moment before shifting away. Margaret's smile faltered, the kind of falter that starts small but spreads quickly, like a tear in fabric. Ethan finally looked up from his phone. "That's not what we were told," he said, glancing sharply at my parents. Selena's voice remained calm, but each syllable was sharpened to a point. "You may have been told many things, Mr. Rivers, but what matters in this room is what was signed, recorded, and made legally binding. And I assure you, these signatures," she tapped the papers, "are from your in-laws, witnessed and notarized months ago." My father's gaze fell to the table, and my mother's lips trembled as she whispered, "We didn't understand, we thought it was temporary." Selena leaned back just enough to give them space, but not enough to soften the moment. "There is nothing temporary about an irrevocable trust. The purpose of this structure is to protect the property for the named beneficiary, in this case, your daughter Penelope, against any external claims." In the stillness that followed, I could feel the shift. My parents' eyes moved between each other, then back to me. And in that moment, I saw it. Not just comprehension, but recognition. Recognition that the child they thought was passive had been quietly safeguarding the family's legacy, while they, swayed by Margaret's persuasion, had nearly given it away. My father's shoulders dropped, the weight of realization pressing them down. My mother's hands folded tightly in her lap. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the overlooked younger daughter. I felt like the one who had carried the torch when everyone else had been too busy arguing over where the light should shine. Margaret's voice sliced through the silence. "So what now, Penelope? You get to play hero while I'm left with nothing?" She laughed, but it was brittle, hollow. "You think you've won? You've just torn this family apart." Selena didn't even glance at her. "The court has already confirmed the trust's validity. This meeting is merely to finalize the administrative details." Ethan leaned back in his chair, suddenly quiet. He understood. There was no legal maneuver left, no hidden clause to exploit. Margaret's eyes darted between him and my parents, looking for an ally but found only stillness. Then my mother's voice broke, softer than I'd heard in years. "We were wrong, Penelope. We should have listened. We thought she needed it more, but we didn't see the cost." Tears welled up and slipped down her cheeks. My father reached for her hand, his own face pale. "We've done you a terrible injustice," he said simply. I wanted to answer, but my throat was tight. I nodded once, slow, deliberate. I wasn't ready to bridge the gap with hugs or reassurances. Not yet. Some wounds need time, and some apologies, however heartfelt, have to be carried for a while before they can be set down. The notary concluded the session with the heavy stamp of his seal, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Papers were exchanged, hands were not. Margaret signed where she had to, her pen pressing so hard it nearly tore the paper. Ethan didn't speak again. My parents avoided my eyes, but their silence was different now, less defensive, more resigned. We all stood, the scrape of chairs on polished wood the only sound. My father moved toward me, hesitated, then placed a hand on my shoulder. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight. I thought of the day we painted the fence together at the villa, the sun hot on our backs, the smell of fresh cedar in the air. Back then, I'd believed family was unshakable. Now I knew it was something you had to keep building, plank by plank, choice by choice. As we stepped out into the humid Florida air, I didn't feel triumph in the loud, cinematic sense. It was quieter than that, steadier. I had protected what mattered, not just for me but for the principle that boundaries, once drawn, deserve respect. And maybe in time, they would see that too. The villa greeted me with the same steady hum it always had, the low whir of the ceiling fans inside, the muffled rush of the ocean just beyond the glass. I stepped in, letting my shoes sink into the familiar grain of the wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of salt and the lavender sachets I'd tucked into the closets years ago. I walked from room to room, collecting the extra devices David had installed. Motion sensors I no longer needed, a few discreet cameras, a speaker that had delivered its lines with perfect timing. Each piece came down quietly, like removing the final stitches after a wound had closed. In the living room, I unlatched the tall windows that faced the ocean. They groaned a little, as if remembering how long they'd been kept shut. When they swung open, the sea breeze came rushing in, cool and unfiltered, carrying the scent of salt and the distant cry of gulls. The curtains billowed like sails, and for a moment I simply stood there, breathing it in. I had always thought of the waves as a kind of clock, relentless, steady, impossible to bargain with. They had been here long before me, and they would remain long after. They marked the line where land met sea, where one thing ended and another began. A boundary, yes, but also a promise. I rested my hands on the windowsill, feeling the sun warm the wood. Everything I had done, every choice, every confrontation, had been to keep this place safe, not just from being taken, but from being forgotten. And now, with the house open to the wind again, it felt alive in a way it hadn't for months. 2 days later, a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in my mother's careful, slightly slanted handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, the paper soft from having been handled more than once. Inside was a Polaroid photo, edges worn. It was us, my parents, Margaret and me, years younger, standing in front of the villa's freshly painted fence. My father's arm was around my shoulders, my mother's sun hat tilted at a jaunty angle, Margaret flashing a smile that seemed so real then. We looked like a family untouched by the sharp edges of adulthood. On the back, in the same handwriting, were 9 words. Will you give your parents a chance to make things right? I read the sentence twice, then a third time. My thumb brushed over the ink, as if I could feel her voice there. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Forgiveness wasn't a switch. It was a tide, sometimes rushing in, sometimes pulling back. I set the photo on the coffee table, right next to the villa's key, the same one I had clutched the day they tried to take it from me. The key caught the afternoon light, a small gleam beside the frozen image of a time when we were whole. I didn't move either of them. Some choices could wait. That evening, I carried a chair out onto the front porch and settled into it as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The ocean turned gold, then copper, then a deepening blue as the day exhaled its last breath of warmth. The waves whispered against the shore, not asking for anything, not demanding to be heard, just existing, the way they always had. Somewhere down the beach, faint but clear, came the sound of children laughing, their voices lifting and tumbling with the wind. I let my gaze follow the line of the water until it disappeared into the dark. My voice was barely more than a murmur when I said, Boundaries can be a form of love too. Because they were. They protected what mattered, even when others didn't understand. They kept you whole when the world tried to take pieces of you. And sometimes, if you were lucky, they gave you the space to heal. The chair creaked gently as I leaned back, letting the salt air wrap around me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether bridges would be rebuilt or whether some distances would remain. But I knew I had done what I needed to do. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.